You know this story. The fire, the fiddle, the Christians fed to lions, the emperor who murdered his own mother, killed his wife, and burned Rome for entertainment, the monster who defined everything we mean when we say tyrant. Nero Claudius Caesar, the fifth emperor of Rome, the man whose name has meant senseless cruelty and artistic vanity for 2000 years. You know it like this. Nero set fire to Rome in 64 CE, then played his lyre and sang while it burned. He blamed Christians for the fire and had them executed in spectacular ways. He murdered his mother Agrippina, had his first wife Octavia executed, and kicked his pregnant second wife Poppaea to death. He was so universally despised that the Senate declared him a public enemy and he was forced to flee and kill himself. That is the story. Now let me tell you what the historical evidence actually shows. Almost none of the worst things attributed to him are supported by primary evidence, and the sources that recorded them had every political reason to destroy his name. The primary sources for Nero's reign are Tacitus, Suetonius, and Cassius Dio. None of them lived during his reign as witnesses. Tacitus was too young to directly observe events. Suetonius was born after Nero's death. Cassius Dio wrote his account over a century later. All three wrote under the Flavian and later dynasties, the emperors who replaced the Julio-Claudian line that Nero represented. These emperors needed the previous dynasty to be remembered as corrupt and monstrous. Their own legitimacy depended on being the successors who restored Roman virtue after Julio-Claudian excess. We have been reading the victor's history again. The historian Anthony Barrett, whose scholarly biography of Nero is one of the most rigorously sourced available, noted that the ancient sources on Nero were writing with clear political motivations and frequently contradict each other on basic facts. When sources contradict each other on whether an event happened at all, that is, not evidence, that is propaganda of uncertain origin. The Great Fire of Rome in 64 CE destroyed 10 of the city's 14 districts. It was catastrophic. It burned for 6 days and 7 nights. Nero was at Antium, modern Anzio, approximately 35 miles from Rome when the fire began. He returned immediately when he heard the news. What Tacitus actually records in the most contemporary of the ancient sources is that Nero opened his own palaces to house the homeless. He personally organized relief efforts. He brought food from Ostia and neighboring towns. He reduced the price of grain. He funded the rebuilding of the city himself, using money from his personal treasury. The image of Nero fiddling while Rome burned comes from Suetonius, writing decades later, who says Nero climbed to a high point and sang a poem about the fall of Troy while watching the fire. Even this account does not say Nero started the fire, played music while people died, or failed to respond. It says he sang a poem. A man who reportedly had genuine artistic sensibilities, watching his city burn, sang about another city that burned. This is not the act of a monster. It is the act of someone processing catastrophe through art. His first 5 years, the Quinquennium Neronis, were widely regarded in antiquity as excellent governance. Even Trajan, one of the most respected emperors in Roman history, said these 5 years were among the finest in Roman imperial history. He abolished capital punishment for his first years in power. He tried to abolish indirect taxes entirely. His Senate had to talk him out of it. He reduced corruption. He improved conditions for slaves. He was genuinely passionate about the arts. He performed publicly as a singer and lyre player, something that scandalized the Roman aristocracy, because performing arts were considered beneath the dignity of a Roman nobleman. The Greek world adored him. When he died, the common people of Rome mourned, not the Senate, the people. For decades after his death, flowers were placed on his tomb. People dressed as him appeared in public. 3 separate impostors claiming to be Nero returned from the dead gained popular followings. The people wanted him back. The question of who started the Great Fire of Rome has been debated for 2000 years. There are 3 main theories in the ancient sources themselves. First, it was an accident in the crowded wooden city. Second, Nero ordered it. Third, it was started by his enemies. Tacitus, the most careful of the ancient historians, is notably ambiguous. He says there were rumors Nero ordered it. He also says there were counter-rumors. He does not conclude. What the archaeological evidence shows is that the Domus Aurea, the golden house that Nero built on land cleared by the fire, was not designed before the fire. The building started after the fire and used cleared land. This is consistent with opportunism. A city burned possibly by accident, and Nero used the cleared space to build. Opportunism is not heroic, but it is not the same as arson. The killing of Agrippina and the execution of Octavia are the hardest parts of Nero's record to defend. The evidence that he ordered their deaths is stronger than most of what he is accused of. But the context matters. Agrippina was not a passive victim. She had poisoned Nero's adoptive father Claudius to place Nero on the throne. She had attempted to co-rule the empire through her son. She had accumulated enemies at a rate that even her allies considered dangerous. None of this makes her killing acceptable, but the picture of an innocent mother murdered by a monstrous son is not what the evidence shows. It shows two people in a brutal power struggle in the most dangerous political environment in the ancient world. Papia was not kicked to death. The story comes from Suetonius. No other source confirms it. The archaeological and physical evidence suggests she died in childbirth or from complications of a late-term pregnancy. The story of Nero has been told for 2,000 years as the story of the emperor who represents pure tyrannical evil. The actual historical record shows something considerably more complicated. A ruler whose first years were genuinely excellent, who responded to the fire of Rome with relief efforts, whose harshest acts were in the context of Roman imperial politics that required brutality to survive, who was passionately invested in art in a culture that considered art beneath dignity, who was mourned by the common people and destroyed by the ruling class. He was not a good man by modern standards. He killed people. He misused power. He was also not the monster the history books built. We live in a world where the people who control the historical record control which rulers are remembered as monsters and which are remembered as heroes, where the sources we read were written by the winners, where 2,000 years of repetition has made propaganda feel like fact. Nero did not fiddle while Rome burned, default text. He opened his palace to the homeless and funded the rebuilding himself. The Senate declared him a public enemy anyway, and they wrote the history books, so we remember the fiddle. Script by Grey Wall Stories. Every wall holds a story. Some walls were built by men who wrote the history and burned the evidence.